Live.
There we go. All right, there we go. Welcome to Master the Game. I am Juice, and tonight I am hosting the overall live stream of this DM roundtable. We have 4 amazing questions with 4 amazing DMs. Well, 3 and then myself. But we are going to make this as fun and interesting of a conversation as we can. I think you're going to love this. If you haven't caught any of these roundtables before, I promise you're going to enjoy yourselves. With that, I'm going to give it over to Mr. Welch. He is going to be hosting these individual videos on his channel. And so he's actually going to host the questions, and I'm going to kick it over to him. So take it over.
Well, howdy, y'all. This is my first time hosting one of these. We have a lovely selection of questions, which we will go into in depth, but let's kick it around the table while everybody introduces themselves. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
I will go first. No,
oh, okay, no,
first,
Fred, it's your thing. Go
okay.
for it.
It's not. I just wrangle everybody into the right position. So that's how it is. My name is Fred Wheeler. I run the House D&D YouTube channel. I am on Facebook and Twitter, and I talk about Dungeons and Dragons and RPGs and all sorts of other things like that. And I wrangle YouTubers who talk about role-play games and Dungeons and Dragons into these things. That's what I do.
You do a good job at it too.
Here's Kevin.
I'm Kevin. And I'm Kevin, also known as KR King. I have a channel, D&D Homebrew, where I talk about homebrewing your own campaign, world building, thinking about all the stuff that it takes to create a world and those aspects of it.
I am Juice from Master the Game. We do a variety of RPG topics on this channel. We have a separate channel for most of our live streams, just called Master the Game Streams. You can Google it, you can YouTube it, and you'll find it. We do live stream games. We also do conversational things like this. We've interviewed guests in the industry. We've interviewed other YouTubers and Twitch streamers and TikTokers. So you can check me out on that channel, as well as my primary channel, Master the Game RPG, which we are streaming from now, where again we do reviews, we do tips videos, opinion videos, hot topic issues, things like that, and occasionally a live stream, whether it's a solo live stream or something like this.
And I am Mr. Welch. I run the Mr. Welch channel. We talk about the Mystara D&D setting, and we review RPGs. And yes, I am the guy that wrote the Mr. Welch list, if anybody's going to ask, because they always do. So let's get this party started. And first question, going off of the fact that 5th edition tends to be very magic heavy, and it's getting more magic heavy as it goes. We'll go with Juice. How do you go about setting up a low magic campaign?
So it kind of depends on the group. I don't do a lot of low magic campaigns. Like, I run either games in a published setting, and so if that's not a low magic campaign or setting, then I don't do it. When it comes to my homebrew world, it's high magic. So looking at that, again, when it's a low magic setting, I'm thinking like Dragon Age, but the only way we do it low magic is because we're playing up the fact that magic users in that setting tend to be looked at as scary because they're opening the possibility of becoming corrupted by demons. So it's not common that you have a lot of spellcasters. There's not a ton of magic items and things like that. The game we use for that isn't necessarily Dungeons & Dragons. We actually use Green Ronin Publishing's Dragon Age setting or Fantasy Age books for that. 3d6 system, so it's really, really simple. There's only 3 classes, expert, like a warrior class, and like a spellcaster class. And again, with spellcasting, you always have a chance to be corrupted and basically have your character turn into a demon. So you're a couple bad rolls away from losing your characters. When doing something like this, though, I think it's very important to talk to your group up front, especially if they're not familiar with a setting like this, because if you present to them, hey, first session, after you've created your characters, oh, by the way, your couple bad rolls, now that is now my character, and the rest of the party is now fighting a demon, as well as all the bad guys. That's not cool to drop on your players. So it's a very important thing to let your group know up front. of the possibilities of things like that. And I've played with people who don't necessarily like that aspect of that class mechanically, and so we've made it even harder mechanically sometimes, or at least talked about it, so that they don't have that risk come up. But yeah, that's about it. Because again, I don't run a lot of low magic in games.
All right. Kevin.
Well, it's interesting because I think of low magic, and I was wondering about this in the question, and I got it from Juce's answer that you're like talking about low magic in terms of the entire material plane or, the area that they live in. But I also think about magic items as well. In that sense, I play kind of a low magic. I hand those out very sparingly. But, remember years ago they had the Dark Sun setting. I ran in that. That was a very interesting, it was kind of unique when it came out at the time. As I remember, there had been this conflagration and spell casting, reduced something in the whole plane. So sorcerers and spellcasters were very looked down upon. It was very low magic. It was very gritty. I think, is it the Iron Sword or the campaign that's set in sort of a pre-medieval time that's out there that I've seen where they have this low magic? I have run in them. I haven't run them, but I think because I set up a homebrewed campaign, I would, set up a world in which there had been something happen, whether the demon infiltration, the Dark Sun thing, something's going on, or you're in the dying earth category where, dying world where that magic. And the main thing to me is to get your players buy-in, because if you've got 5e players, they are used to magic. They want magic. It's just like you play with people and they look at that Dungeon Master's Guide and they see all those wondrous items and they see all that magic and they're like, when do I get that? Now that I'm 9th level, will I have, the Rod of Absorption, the this, the that? And I've played in games. I played in this one game where we were in this big battle and we were falling down this pit and someone said, I think it had an anti-magic thing, and he says, I've got a Helm of Teleportation. And I'm like, really? All this time? And then the other guy said, I've got one too. And I just thought, wow, this is a different world. Now, we all started in this thing at 13th level, but so I am used to sort of low magic in terms of items, and I think if you could get people to buy into a low magic setting, 5e people, they might really find it interesting. They might find the challenge of it something they haven't experienced. It's a whole different way of playing. It's kind of a little like the old sword and sorcery Conan kind of stuff or whatever. Again, there was magic there, but it isn't all these, how many supplements are there and all these different characters and all these abilities. I think it could be really interesting for players, but you got to get them to buy in.
Hit the wrong button there. Okay, Fred, what's up?
Well, I think for me, this question was really broad and absolutely, I think when it comes to having a low magic setting, then you just have to make magic rare. Session 0 is really important, and the kind of campaign you're playing. I mean, for example, Star Wars Saga, when I ran that, there's not really a lot of magic. There's the Force. But even when you're using the Force, it's not like everybody's a Jedi. Unless, of course, you ran a campaign where everybody was a Jedi, and good luck. And then Dark Sun. Dark Sun was, I've run a campaign in Dark Sun, and I found that I enjoyed Dark Sun as a dungeon master. My players hated it. Hey, look, for those of you who think that Dark Sun should come back, it's the dungeon masters who want it, and the players will not. So you will have the book on your shelf, and you'll never get to run it. Okay? I've never been able to get it happen again. I conned them in the first time, and they said, no, we've had enough. We're going and doing something else. We want vanilla fantasy.
If it comes back, I'll play. I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck getting everybody else to. You'll be playing on your own. So I guess rare magic is a tricky thing for 5e. I mean, usually I just try to use potions and consumables in terms of magic items. There won't be a lot of spell casting going on. For 5e, it's really tough because the problem with 5e and a low magic campaign is the designers were trying to go back to sort of older versions of the game where magic was rare. You had to find everything. You couldn't go to a shop and just buy it. That's just not how it worked. That's the reason why you explored everything, is you just had no idea where their magic items were positioned, and they were usually placed in really tough and hard to find locations. And there was usually a guardian as well. So like you had to work for them pretty hard. So it was a big deal. So the designers of 5e thought, well, we're going to bring this back into 5e from the older version of basic and advanced Dungeons and Dragons. But they did not consider asking the player base who've been playing video games and so forth. And so I find it is an upward battle with them, because they're used to Diablo, where you throwing away +1 and +2 swords and looking for a +3 sword. Like, I've got too many. I've got 100 of these things after playing Diablo. They've played so much 4E or 3.5, even if they haven't played video games. Most people have played video games. So they used to be dripping. You like you had magic slots for your fingers, your arms, your heads, good Lord. I won't mention anything else, but there were a lot of slots anyway. So it's difficult with 5e. I've tried to run high end and low end, and people just don't seem to like low end. I would have to find dungeon masters who have sort of been ground down into the dust by the use of magic items or magic in the campaign to have a campaign that's really, really low magic. Like, I mean, even Conan the Barbarian wasn't that low magic. There was still magic. It was just rare, and it was usually not many people doing it. Like
you had really powerful people, right? But just a few.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I guess that's how I deal with it, or don't deal with it.
Yeah.
Well, I've played D&D, I guess, in all 6 versions, not counting original. We've actually had 2 low magic settings. Dragonlance was one, because wizards were isolated, and there were no clerics. There was Goldmoon. If you wanted to play a cleric, you played Goldmoon, because there wasn't another option. And then you had Dark Sun, where magic was bad. And you really have to sell it to your players. And the way you do it, like the Conan, I found, is if you're going to have wizards, they're going to be special. And every other wizard they're going to be is going to squash them like a bug. And it's you try to work the hero's journey into the low magic. Mm-hmm. It's like the cleric, you're the only cleric. You're a first level wizard. The next level wizard is level 15, and he's a bad guy. And that's one way to do it. So there's no medium wizards. Your wizard will never meet another wizard unless you're facing the bad guy. He'll always be able to squash you until the end. But you really have to work it in with the players and try to find the people that want to play in a setting where it's not just a looter shooter with magic swords instead of guns. And so, as a DM, you have your work cut out for you. But it can be a really fun experience.
Yeah, isn't the key really just to get player buy-in? Like, if you get the whole group to agree that that's what they all are open to do, they'll give it an honest shot. I mean, if not, they don't, right?
Well, and it's interesting because Fred's saying players hate it, and I played in the Dark Sun. I didn't hate it so. I mean, I was just interested. I thought, oh, this is something, and I knew I was going to go back at some point. I sort of liked the old Twilight of the Idols kind of thing. It was just fascinating to me, and I had a good referee, as we used to call him in those days. And again, remember Gygax, Arnis, they would make fun of people. They'd write in letters and say, I have all these items. What do I do with them to their dragon men? They would say, you're not supposed to have that much magic, right? It's not supposed to be that. Although then people turn around and go, well, look at Tomb of Horrors or some of these things that did have, and the treasure they gave away. Yep. But I just, like we're all saying, if you can convince them, you might just try this and have fun. I think it can work. But with today's players, maybe.
There's definitely a group of people out there who like difficult campaigns too, with lower magic, with less magic items, where you have to outthink the situation. There's a lot of people out there who like it. A lot of them in the OSR community, for example.
There's a reason why most video games, especially the RPGs, have survivor mode as a difficulty level, because people like that. Jesus
or you just make a game like Elden Ring.
Yeah.
I haven't played it, but I've heard.
Rage quit that one. No, my wife rage quit after about 2 days. So, but all of her friends are like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" It's like I can't get past level 4. Okay, speaking of player agency, let's see the next question. It's a beautiful question with some lovely trappings. Okay, when you're building your, one of my staple statements is when I'm building a campaign is what you leave out is as important as what you leave in. So for you, how do you handle restrictions on races and classes in a campaign, and how do you balance them? And we'll go with Kevin this time.
Well, it's interesting because I guess the question might be balance. What does that, refer to? If we're talking about the standard, races, in the 5e system, and then, when people are building their, how can I say, when I run with people, you do builds and stuff, and everybody's looking at, okay, I'm going to be this race, and I'm going to do this character class, and I'm going to have these stat blocks built up. How much is that? Does it, influence? Like you're not. Oh, you wouldn't be a human sorcerer, right? Obviously, you can have human variant. But I think part of this goes back to when they came up with this system. You had this Tolkien artifact of dwarves, elves, hobbits, all built into this game because this is what these guys built their mythology on. And they took it as a game mechanic to say, well, if you're a dwarf or a halfling, you go slower, right? You live longer. And in the days when you used to have aging stuff, ghost touch, you were aged 10 years. So those kind of things would make it deadly. And the question is, what I would say is, do you need to make it balanced, or do you just have everyone, as we were talking about, sort of with the low magic, just buy into that? Buy into the fact that there are these settings. Because the other thing is, there's this kind of movement, I feel like, to make character classes and races and everything all sort of this, almost like human beings, like we're all 99% the same, and sort of get rid of that kind of stuff or make it optional or something. But I'm sort of like, you have classes. You have a martial class that has an advantage in fighting, and then you have a arcane or a divine class that has an advantage in spell casting and so forth. So to me, the final thing is, if the storylines are good, if, people have opportunities with the individual stories you give them. One of these questions is about subplots, and I think this relates to that in terms of making the players interested in that kind of thing. I like the differences. I like the idea that some people are good at some things and some people are better at others. And whether or not, everybody always says, at the end, the wizard is always the most powerful, right? At the beginning, it's the martial classes or something, or maybe now with some of these new variants and stuff that's out there. Because when I sit down at tables and someone has this incredible class that they've built out of, Tasha's mixed with some other book, and I'm always like, what is the, and they all claim, and they've got it all, stat blocked out. In the end, it's still the storyline. And of course, as a GM, you can beat anybody, right? So to me, that's the thing. I kind of like the idea that there's differences between the classes. Just my preference, like maybe the old school. Because I played, the original box set and whatnot. Although, as I've told people, those, I don't know, Mr. Welch, if you played that box set, it was a little unplayable. You had to homebrew the whole thing. But, and there were classes that only went this high, and there were other classes that went, and we just bought into it. We just said, that's the way of the world. And we never thought, this is, unbalanced, right? So just depends on how you get everyone to buy in, I guess.
All right. Fred, what's your opinion?
This is a tricky one for me, because the reality is it depends on sort of the environment in terms of restrictions on races and classes in a campaign and how to balance them. If I was running Dungeons and Dragons Adventurers League, like, I just got to run by whatever they give me, and that's it. It's not an environment I really want to go back as a dungeon master to. I feel I give a lot of respect to those people who keep doing that, because I see the landscape for that to be quite untenable, frankly, for my patients. And I think it's also, a lot of people who are playing in that environment don't sort of give the dungeon masters enough credence for just how difficult that situation is. Now, in my own home group, I'll talk about my situation in my home group. I think that's more, I'm not really caring too much about everybody else, but this is sort of how we do it. I don't worry about balance. Like, Fireball was never balanced. Wizards were really not balanced. Everything was never really balanced. There were attempts by Gary Gygax to try and balance stuff, and Dave Arneson was very much against balance in the game. and they were at loggerheads on that one. So for me, I never saw that there was balance in the game at any point. The only time that they started talking about game balance, I believe, is with Wizards of the Coast in version 3 and then version 4 and now version 5, where they want to try and have calculations and try to this should be fair and this should be sort of equatable to that, and I'm like, okay, whatever. I think for me, I like there being lots of different races. For me, I'm fond of that, but that doesn't mean I want every single race in every single campaign. And that's the reality for my home group. I will put in restrictions for the things that I think make sense for the whatever that is. But if it's a homebrew world, that pretty much it could probably be just anything goes for me. In terms of classes, I never really had too much interest in the different classes. Frankly, I always felt like your class was not your character. It was your brain that was your character. I know a lot of people get confused and what do you mean you're playing the game? And it's based on what the player knows and how the player reacts rather than what all the character stuff is. And I'm like, okay. So for me, recently I've found with Tashes, we don't use Tashes. We use, I think it's the Beast path for the Barbarian out of Tashes. We're using the Wizard Order of Scribes out of Tashes. And the rest of it is just not used. It's not banned as such from our table. What we've done is I've just said, I'm just not using that because there's stuff in there that I can't build a campaign around. It's just too good. If suddenly the entire party can see 300 feet in darkness, then the monsters are dead before they ever see them. And there's nothing I can do with that unless I put them behind total cover and they know everybody's coming because there's alarm everywhere or something like that. It's too much work, and I'm not really up for that. Thank you very much. But we have banned things that my group, usually by consensus or democratic vote. Usually a ban will go down in my group. We banned the Gloomstalker Ranger. We ran that for just over a year, and we said in the end, even the player playing it said, nah, it's too much. It's ridiculous. We got rid of Silvery Barbs after I abused the spell in a campaign recently. It wasn't just me. There was other people as well. But yeah, we got rid of that for that. Just things that are too easy to abuse, that are like an instant press a button and everything is solved. Trying to avoid that sort of thing. And so I think, now that I've looked at Tashes for 5e in particular, I'll probably start bringing some of that stuff in when I run the campaign, but the Dungeon Master right now isn't up for that. They're like, nah, which is fine with me. I think my biggest issue is everybody should be allowed and feel like they can have restrictions on races and classes and backgrounds and other features. But there seems to be an ongoing in the population. I hear it all the time, and it's not happening in my group, but I hear it all the time. You're a bad person if you put restrictions in place, and I'm like, I'm not too sure about that. I mean, come on, just back off and let somebody else run the game they want to run. It is difficult as a dungeon master to sell this to players, even my own players who I've been playing with for almost eight years. There are certain things like, nah, we want to keep feats and multi-classing. When I said, look, can we get rid of feats and multi-classing for once? And they said no. I was like, okay, it's staying. That's how it is. That's how it is. Monster races. There's a lot of stuff going around monster races. My issue with monster races in Dungeons and Dragons 5e is, and I never really, in Star Wars where there were so many different races, so I was happy, let's just go with it. I don't care what it is, what they look like. And I think my biggest issue with Monsters of the Multiverse is it is an attempt to go balanced, and it feels like 4E a little bit, where the classes started to feel kind of homogenous, everybody was the same and the races were all the same. But the other thing is, my biggest issue is a kobold doesn't get pack tactics now. I get it. It's a very powerful feature, but I don't want to have kobolds in every single campaign. And if somebody's doing it just because they want to min max, then well, a year down the track it'll probably get the ban hammer. But I want them to be able to have a campaign where we can play goblins and kobolds, and you can play a goblin and you can have nimble escape and disengage and hide as a bonus action. Like I want that there, and it's kind of taken away. So a lot of the books are doing things that feel like I just returned to 4E, and I've dungeon mastered and played in that, and I don't want to do that. So in my own home group, in terms of restrictions, it's usually by consensus. In a public game, like, I don't really have any control over that, and it's going to be whatever it is, and that's how I deal with it, I guess. Or is that dealing with it?
Interesting.
Okay, Juice, tell us what we're missing.
So, I don't think you're a bad person, Fred. I just want to throw that out there. But I am a yes and or a yes but DM. I've said this before. If I have a player who wants to play a broken combo of some sort from the new books that I haven't read, go ahead. The day I decide that it is being abused, though, I'm going to have a conversation with them, and we're going to discuss, hey, maybe you shouldn't always use rope trick because you need a short rest so you can get all your spell slots back, or maybe you shouldn't do this constantly, and you know what I mean? So I think that's all stuff you can talk about outside of the game. Or your cleric that's doing spirit guardians constantly, and stuff like that. Again, all this stuff can be abused, and to me that's more of a player thing, and usually players viewing it more like a game than role playing, and rather than a collaborative story. And I like the more narrative style and collaborative story. Now, I've had problems with, like you were saying, a lot of monster races. But my issue with it has never been mechanically. It's usually that, like, everybody's playing a monster race and they're trying to go into this place of all humans. They're getting weird looks and they're trying to role play like they're a fellow human. And it's like, no, you're a dragonborn or a half orc or a kobold. And by the way, there's kobolds in the mountains that have been eating the livestock nearby. Of course, they're not going to be real friendly to you. So that's kind of been an issue for me at times. But again, I am somebody who's like, if you want to play these things, that's great. I will tell them what I think their characters would know. Like, hey guys, just remember, you are all goblins. Like, use some caution when you're in this human settlement that's near, hobgoblins and orc camps and stuff. And so where they're probably not going to be real friendly to you. So I'll voice that. But for example, I have a campaign right now that I had 2 of the 5 players who wanted to be a race that wasn't even in 5e. I had someone who wanted to be a treant. So I statted out a treant and sub races for it. I also did the same thing for someone who wanted to play a harpy. And when it came to trying to balance it, I don't care too much about balance personally. I did look at some of the other races, like a tiefling and the spells they get, or a high elf. And when I gave them abilities associated with it, I just kind of was like, is this more powerful than that? If it was, is it kind of in line, or is it really more, And so I just judge it on that when it comes to, I guess, balancing. But when you look at, say, 5e, there is not a true balance. Like, early on, there's some classes that are better than others. And there's, once you get into like 4th and 5th level, there's other classes that now are shining. And then you get to like 8th and 9th, and it's a whole new set of classes that are really good. So, and depending on what you want to be, like if you want to be a tank at low level, druids are phenomenal for that. But barbarians are always good at it. Paladins kind of step up and allow a lot of cool stuff later on, such as resistances for you and your whole party. And, so again, I don't worry too much about balance. And I think the trick, especially with D&D 5e, is you have to look, no matter what, you have to look at what your players are playing, because it changes things drastically. If you're running an undead campaign and there's paladins and clerics in the party, it's going to change things compared to, say, if they had a druid instead of that cleric, and maybe they had a barbarian instead of that paladin. It's completely different. A cleric and a paladin are going to wipe undead like nothing. So you always have to sort of take into account the specific strengths and weaknesses of the party as a whole. So again, I don't worry too much about balancing, when I do encounters, I don't even do any CR calculations or any of that crap. I'm just like, what makes sense for this area? Okay, my party's around this level. I'm going to throw this many of this monster I want to use for this area. That's how I do it. I try to make it logical, so it doesn't feel like, oh, he clearly is doing this because we're 6th level or whatever. I try to use some logic based on the setting and things like that. But yeah, I don't worry too much about that. And I have no problem allowing third-party stuff, but I want to view it first and just kind of compare it. And I have no problem like whipping something up on my own for my group. If I have at least a week in advance, it shouldn't be a problem. Like I said, I did it for two players in one of my current campaigns. So yeah, I mean, I played AD&D. That wasn't balanced. It was luck of the roll, and you had what you had, and you might have a really weak 2 hit point fighter trying to go through the keep on the Borderlands, or you might have a 7 hit point or 8 hit point wizard that's casting sleep on everybody. Like, who knows? But so to me, balance is overrated in the first place. It's nice to have for some people who are not, I think, capable of creating encounters on the fly that can be challenging or give off a feel they want. But other than that, I don't think balance matters that much, personally.
We're waiting for Kevin. Kevin.
Yeah, I
actually
popped off and came back.
Oh, okay.
Fred there?
We're still here.
Hopefully-
Yeah,
I don't see
here.
Fred.
All right.
Minor technical glitch. Well,
Hopefully your stream
I
is all
look
right.
at
Peter.
it.
Yeah, my stream's okay. I've made it more generic in recent years for stuff like that, so I don't have to like shuffle everything anymore when I do streams like this.
Yeah, we'll cut
It's
this
just
out.
one big box.
Yeah. When I look at settings, again, I look at it from the point of view of a writer. The less you put in, it gives you more to work with because you can focus on those. For a fun setting, ban humans. Force them to play something else. Or be very selective with the races you do allow. And don't pick the generic ones. Classic example. If I told you that if I was only allowing you to play elves, halflings, Nagpa, and Aranea, what are we playing in? We're playing in the Dark Crystal. And great story, but limited, very limited races. But that's how you do that's how you tell the tale. You've got 7 main D&D settings that aren't catch-alls. Planescape, Ravenloft, and Spelljammer. You can play anything. You should play anything. You should play everything. It's like and because that's the whole point of it is you're taking stuff from everywhere. But like people talk about the Drow. Drow are in 3 of the 7 remaining settings. You don't have them in Dragonlands. You don't have them in Dark Sun. You don't have them in Birthright. You don't have them in Mystara. So if somebody wanted to play one, you suggest something else. Or on the other hand, you can restrict race. You can restrict classes, especially if you want to restrict the class to a specific race, like Mystara when we were doing 5th edition. We restricted Eldritch Knight to just elves because that's their super secret class that only they have. So when you see one, it's got a lot of impact behind it, and that is then people want to know is like, well, how do I do this? And it's like, okay, well, you get born an elf, and then you spend 100 years working on your sword play, and then we'll teach you some magic. And the smaller you go, the more you can expand out later, rather than just throwing everything at everybody once. And I strongly recommend that when you're building your setting, go by each race and say, does this fit in? Can I work this into the game, and can I entertain the players with it without throwing too much at once?
Yeah.
And that way you can always add later. It's easier to add than subtract, or as writers say, it's easier to edit than pad. So I guess that's the kind of the reverse. But when you're putting together your game, see what you want to do, and if anything falls outside your initial idea, leave it out for now. And then you can come back to it later and work around with your players. And again, it has to be, you pitch it between your players and the DM, and you try to come up with a healthy medium. Sometimes the players will give you a great idea, but just because somebody wants to play something that doesn't fit into the setting, or what it's, I think it was Seth Sikorsky said, you want to avoid the 13th Warrior scenario, or 13th Warrior character, where he's like, I would like to join this game. I have no ties to the rest of the party. I don't speak the same language. I'm not a fighter. I just showed up and I want to be part of the campaign. And I'm going to be the burden for about 2/3 of the adventure. That might be fun for him, but it's not going to be fun for everybody else. So, sometimes you got to use the DM veto. But okay, anybody else got anything to add?
Actually, so I forgot to mention one thing I love to do. So I've had groups where I have had like maybe 3 of the 4, 3 of the 5 that wanted to play the same race, for example. And so it had inspired me to incentivize the whole group playing as that race. Like, hey, I'll give you a bonus feat at first level if you all play the elves. You can be whatever variety of elves, but I want you guys to be, and because then it triggered me to be like, all right, you're from this elven colony. Why are you guys, adventuring? Like, what is it that you're interested in exploring, and so on. And so then again, incentivizing it actually allowed for group consistency, which made the role play between them already step up. And it gets rid of, having to worry about all the different crazy races and combinations that there were. That was kind of nice. I haven't done it yet, but one of the things I'd also love to do is play like a all same class party someday.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I've played those.
Yeah, I think that would be a ton of fun. Now, yes, you have overlap with certain things. You can do things, especially in 5e, to still differentiate yourself, but I think it would still be a really fun way to play. And, you don't have a healer or whatever. Like, you don't need that. There's magical healing by potions and junk like that. NPCs, or heck, you could still hire people if you wanted to, or visit temples. So it's just something I've always thought would be kind of fun, though.
Yeah. So do we want to take a break or just keep going? Because we're kind of flying through these.
Fred? You're muted or something.
Fred, you're muted.
Okay, all right. That's the best. That's the best way to have me as muted. Okay, so I've played in a campaign where everybody was a gnome or a dwarf. It's quite funny because when you start off as a gnome or a dwarf, and then as the game progresses and the campaign goes on, slowly but surely everybody starts perishing or casting reincarnate, because nobody wants to cast Raise Dead, because reincarnate is just more hilarious. So you wind up with like one gnome left out of an all gnome party, or it's happened to me with dwarves as well. But I remember that Pathfinder put out a campaign which was, I think, Weeby Goblins. It was an adventure, and it was kind of like a campaign. And the restriction was you could only play a goblin. So, and we had a ball. The opportunity, like, you didn't go into town. No, you went and killed their dogs and ate their pigs and stole their stuff, and had to be careful because the local ogre was really liked eating goblins. So you had to be careful when they showed up. So it's a different sort of story. It's like on the other side of the fence. Or you're wound up trying to find fireworks because they like blowing things up. So I found that was really interesting. I've had groups who have, I haven't played in them, but I've had people try to show up with all clerics and all wizards. I think I don't really want an all wizard party, but they did try to do it to me one day, and the one that scares me the most is all clerics. I'm not sure what to do with all clerics.
That's a tough one, because clerics can run crazy over a campaign.
Yeah.
Well, clerics can do anything.
Yeah.
They can be in the front, they can be in the back. They're so versatile. And if you're playing 5e, like, a cleric can do anything under the sun. It covers all the bases. You don't have to worry about it. Yeah, you're all good.
And then they all have mass healing words, so they're all healing each other, and because they're life clerics, they get healed when they heal others.
Yeah.
Look, that just means you can throw a lot of hard shit at them. And that is amazing. Like, oh, you're level 2 and you want to fight the red dragon. Well, let's do this end game boss right now.
I have played an all paladin campaign. I have played an all gnome campaign. And when we ran Curse of Strahd, all my players decided they want to be Lupin. which gave us the rather amusing pug wizard named Fez the Necessary. So
I like it.
he kind of stood out.
I had a
Well, I think your
question
battle
for
cry
Juce.
was-
I'm sorry, when you ran that camp, because I've noticed this with other players, when there's like a goblin or there's something, and they sort of, the players I've seen want to assume as though they're just accepted like anyone else. They can go and maybe they get a stare, the old tiefling thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you try to say society doesn't like kobolds or goblin, remember there was a half-orc controversy. I remember when they first were introduced, where people were like half-orcs would not be accepted, and I think that kind of went away. People didn't want that. They wanted it more a gaming environment, not necessarily creating a world with all the attitudes and negative things that are in the real world. They wanted this to be, they just wanted to have their character and everything to be friendly or something like that. I don't know if you've seen that, because I have in games where people play, and I wonder to myself, I'm playing this game, so I'm like, well, everyone accepts the kobold, everyone accepts this.
Yes.
Okay,
So that's a fair thing. So I actually, for example, I don't mind that like Wizards of the Coast has gone and normalized like being a half-orc and things like that. To me, it doesn't matter what the game system says as much as specific settings. And that, I mean, that's just how I treat it. Like if I know in my world there's a war between half-orcs and humans in this part of the world, I'm, no matter what, if you're on the human side and you're a half-orc, they're going to distrust you. Just like right now, if you're in Ukraine and someone's speaking Russian, they might not be a Russian soldier or spy, but there's going to be questions, so.
And if you choose to be a Russian speaker, you just tell them this is the way it is, right?
Right. So, but again, like you're saying, some players might not want to explore those real things. Again, I think that's stuff you talk about ahead of time.
Right.
And I've run a lot of campaigns with monster races. I currently stream a game that's all kobolds. It's Descent into Avernus. Everybody's a kobold. We do have pack tactics. If somebody wanted to use some of the newer stuff without the pack tactics, okay, I don't care. Do what you want to do. We'll handle it in the game. But yeah, it's been great. It's been hilarious. And one of them actually just kind of died, but I gave him a mulligan and let him become a 1-level warlock with his patron being Tiamat. And so he now worships Tiamat. He's in hell, and the rest of the party doesn't worship Tiamat, but it's their buddy, so they're all cool with it because hey, he's still alive. So they're cool with it. That's been a lot of fun. I think it comes down to your groups. If you have a group that's sensitive to stuff like that, then sure, don't do that kind of thing. My homebrew setting, again, I have different parts of my world where it's commingled and everyone's like, oh, it's a goblin, no big deal. And, or it's a half-orc. Again, no big deal hanging out with the elves or the nobles or whatever. I like to mix it up in all sorts of parts of my world where some places are very accepting of everybody. Other places might not be. I don't necessarily play up like racism, like real world racism though. Like it's usually much more subtle when it comes to how they interact with players. And I don't go too deep into like pillaging and raping or torture. Like I don't go too deep into that kind of stuff. To me, it's let the players be heroes. If you need a villain, there's ways to do it without getting truly despicable. You can kind of paint the picture without saying everything. You can let the players make it in their own mind. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I've always tended to have like an open city, Wild West frontier town where everybody, you enter that city and you're on, no one judges you, whatever. But then you have certain walled cities or whatever where, and you may be a human of a different city or an elf, and they want nothing to do with you or whatever. So again, establishing your world and the rules, and it's a fantasy world. We're just, but I do like those places because a lot of players like to go to the open city. That's where all the fun is. It's like Vegas,
Yeah, it's the red light district.
Exactly.
The Wild West. Let's go
goes.
Take each other out in the alley.
Exactly.
Some settings like Greyhawk, it doesn't even have, the animosity isn't even between races, but it's between nationalities, which is one of the big things. With Greyhawk has like six nations that are supposed to be lawful good, and they can't stand each other. Or as somebody put it bluntly when they're introducing the different party members, and somebody introduces this one character, and the other one goes, "It'll be a cold day in hell before I let my daughter marry a Nyrundi," And So it adds tension if you, but if you do it right.
Yeah, it doesn't get personal, but it sort of is personal. There's a tricky balance there.
Oh, you're from Jeff. If I knew that, I would, Yeah. Who names their nation Jeff?
Someone named Jeff.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think
Lord.
they surprised. Yeah.
I would like to
think they
say
surprised
something
him.
to that,
Was that?
Mr. Welch. I'd like to point out who calls their planet dirt.
A planet that's
Earth
covered in
is
dirt.
dirt, isn't it? Earth dirt. It's like somebody called it dirt. I mean, seriously, come on. You couldn't have think of something any better than that. Oh my good lord. Let's go see some of the other civilizations around the world. They actually came up with good names, like not dirt or earth. Well, come on, jeez.
What planet is this? It's Coruscant. What does it mean? It's like it translates from our language into dirt. So do we
That just
want
goes to tell you the best names are usually the most simple, basic names. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Yep.
We want to pause, or we want to go to the next one?
It's up to you guys. I'm fine right now, but
I'm
Fine.
fine to take a pause now because I've been live streaming before this.
all right, let's do it. So
yeah.
we'll
Okay.
be back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss the next couple questions. Be right back.
I won't be long.
let me find that question.
All right, we are back. Take it away, Mr. Welch.
Okay, now we're going into the first two of the two questions for the missing pillars of D&D that I strongly advocate. And this question is when your players give you those really long backstories with all sorts of subplots, how do you incorporate them into your campaign, and with what regularity? So, Fred, you're up to bat first time.
Sure. I guess first off, I usually have a discussion with my players about sort of what sort of campaign we're going to run. So what you're talking about is not something that I generally encourage my players to do. I usually sort of give them a rough idea of the sorts of things that I need to know. When people build that sort of thing, it's what I call the episodic, and I think most people do actually, the episodic campaign, where the adventure and what takes place is not constructed by the dungeon master really. It's actually constructed based around every single character. So it's like running a TV series, like say Star Trek, where every week or every session or every couple of sessions the story or the adventure is related around one particular character, and so therefore you need to have quite a detailed backstory for those characters to be able to build something for it, unless of course you the sort of person who doesn't mind building absolutely around everything around it. I always find that works best if you have a pretty good understanding of the player, the person who's playing. They give it, because when somebody gives you a backstory, it's not completely obvious necessarily what they like. So if you've got a good idea of what they like, then it's easier to build something for those backstories. But then again, also too, when people build backstories for that sort of episodic game, they're not necessarily wanting the things they like. Sometimes they throw you sort of a little spanner in the works and like they're going off in a different direction. So I've found the episodic game is very, very player focused. It's very hit and miss. I found when I've done it that I have some players who are like, yes, this is for me. And then others is like, it's been a swing and miss, because I haven't been able to figure out exactly what they were after, even from the backstory and even from whatever I knew about them from spending time with them. Because usually I won't try to run an episodic game or campaign unless I've had some time with those players, so I get to know them a bit. So I wouldn't do it with strangers. It would be too hard, and I'd probably swing and miss too much. But it's much easier if you know them reasonably well, and you're kind of like friends, and you've hung around each other for a while, and so you know what they do in their spare time and stuff like that. And so I've done, what have I done? I've done The Wizard of Oz. I've done vampires and masquerade balls. I've done journeys to the Nine Hells. I had somebody who played a character who had no arm. I had somebody else who decided they wanted to build a undead army, and somebody else who decided they wanted to be able to travel the world or the multiverse in a flying ship. Somebody else who had decided they wanted to have a dragon, and brought up a dragon from a little baby egg. And these are all sort of part of the episodic campaigns that I've done in the past. I don't do a lot of them nowadays because they require an awful lot of work on your side of the fence as a dungeon master, and I don't particularly find online games very pleasant to try to make that possible, because you've got the head down to sort of the navel, down to the chest, and that's it. And I can't see what else is going on. And so it's like I lose all of that information. And, in the past, you play in person, you can talk over the top of people and you can still get the gist of what's going on. And you do that on a Zoom call and you can't hear nobody. So it's much harder to do that sort of game. What I generally do is, if the campaign I'm running allows for a sort of a subplot from a character to fit, I'll do that. If it doesn't, then I won't do it. And I won't necessarily tell them that I won't do it. if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I usually have a discussion beforehand, like, this is what I'm wanting to do. Are you up for this? If you are, build your character for that campaign. And I give them enough information to build something for that campaign. If it's got a sort of like a relatively prearranged direction, or even it's sort of a sandbox and it's got a particular focus. So I don't want to wind up with a whole lot of Chuck Norrises and lone wolves floating around. If you've ever seen, if you think herding sheep is difficult, try herding lone wolves together. It's not a pleasant experience. I guess the other thing is I tend to focus, to go with subplots, I tend to focus on location rather than necessarily a plot-focused adventure. So it's more about their whatever's going on for that character. There's somebody in a location there's an issue with, so that I don't have to worry about story beats. Because one of the problems you can have when you start relating your campaign around a character is the player gets sick and they can't show up that week, and then everybody's like, well, I guess we're not playing this week because we really need them to be there. So I have to figure out how to get around that little issue. Yeah. It's a little heckle along the way. I think that everybody, as Mr. Welch has pointed out, should definitely try an episodic campaign at some point. I'm not suggesting you do it straight away, but you definitely want to give it a shot and see what it's like. And you want to do it with some people that you really trust and you really get along with, because it will test your friendships to its utmost, and it will also require you to know a lot about them to be successful. That's what I've found anyway, honestly.
Okay. Kevin, what's up?
Well, it's interesting because, people come up with subplots, so they come up with things for their character. You want them to be involved in your world, right? And I run a homebrewed world. I want them to act like their character was alive before the game started, that they had, relationships, and they had feuds, and they had resentments. And so what I always try to do is say, well, my family was ruined by this person, and so my goal is to destroy them. I'll take that person, again, this is the session 0 or even pre-0 or whatever, and work that person into some plot or something that I have going on in a general way. Because what you don't want to do is what Fred was talking about. Suddenly you've got the one person, all I want to do is get back at this guy. So we have to go and everyone else is going, well, now again, if you align the adventure hooks that way, it can work out. But if it doesn't, it starts to become, if that person really, they'll say, Kevin, my character wants to do this, and I get playing role-playing, but there's 4 or 5 other people at the table, right? We all want to have something going on. So you try to make it seamless, work the subplot into the whatever narrative. And again, that narrative may go away, in the sandbox, they might go over here, over there. I try not to railroad, but then the subplot, if someone's really working that, can railroad the action. The other thing is when you have characters that want to interact and they want to do things, I had the characters do the thing, Pippin with Denethor, where he says, I swear my allegiance to you as your servant. And then everyone else is like, sometimes, really? Okay, now this is what's this going to cost? And you try to work it into the action because they're trying to play, or they do something that's, their character that is not necessarily helps the group or this or that. How do you work that in such that it does work out? Sometimes the other players are like, really, and you just let it play. You let it simmer. You let it, because it's a real world or whatever. When the player does something, and it's to their character, and we create a new subplot, I just go along and I try to work it in as best I can. Because again, they're in this world. They want to know that they're impacting the world, just like we all do at some level. And if you try to steer them away from it too much, now again, as I said, if you've got a player and you got to know your group, like Fred said, if you've got somebody that's just determined to be the star of the star of every episode, right, that can be problematic to some other players. And you have those players too, they're just dominant, they want to dominate, they want their storyline. So it does become it's the art of being a GM in a way, right? It's not a science. You gotta play these personalities. That's what makes it so great. You're playing with other personalities, creating this story. So definitely, I like subplots. You got to be careful how you work them in.
Okay, Juce.
So It all stems back to session 0. And I kind of have 3 different approaches to a session 0. And I know going into it, it's either I'm running something that's pre-published, which is going to give the least amount of wiggle room. I'm running a specific theme, possibly in my homebrew world. Again, it's going to have less wiggle room than, say, the third option, but has more wiggle room than the first option. And then there's the third option where I go into it and I have no freaking clue what the campaign is going to be, and we're going to talk about it as a group and figure it out. In all 3 scenarios, I don't want a ton of backstory. I just don't. I don't write a lot. If I write something, it's only going to be a couple paragraphs as a player. It might have the idea for my family size. I don't care if it's used or not. It's just, this is what I know about my character. Here you go. I never write out that they've already been on their most exciting adventures beforehand. None of that stuff. It's always just, here's my family. This is why I got into adventuring. And this is why I'm at whatever level we're starting off, whatever. Now, as a DM, again, I try to get that across to the players. The first thing, no matter what, though, is there has to be a way the party knows each other. So even if you have a lone wolf, they have a tie to another character in the party. So I actually have tables, random tables, that I've made available for my patrons. That I have a D20 list, and I think I have a D100 list over there. But you roll for how you know the character next to you, and you just go clockwise. So every single person in the group has 2 ties to another player character. If one of them's a lone wolf, they still have the gambling tie to this guy and the hunting buddy with this tie. And so even when they go do their lone wolf bullshit, the other people still either reel them back in or latch onto it. And so that is one of the cool ways I've found to help with that. The other thing is when a player does want to give me a lot of backstory, it doesn't matter, because I will, in session 0, I will take notes and ask for the bullet points. Like, okay, what is your bucket list item you want to do as a player in this campaign? What is your bucket list item your character wants to do in this campaign? So that gives me 2 things right there. I don't have to spend a ton of other time. Like, and that could be a long-term thing, a short-term thing. Hey, I want a Vorpal sword by the end of the campaign. It might happen. We'll see. It doesn't guarantee it's going to happen. You might not live long enough for that. You might have a new character by then. But it's nice to know those things going into it. And knowing that far in advance, I might be able to tie it in. Another character might want to, really explore the depths of their character's trauma from childhood and how they overcame it, whatever, and be a special snowflake. Okay, we might be able to do that over the course of the campaign a couple different times. And that would require me talking to them in between sessions. Like, hey, I know what's kind of happening based on where you guys left off. I have this idea. Are you cool with this for the next session? Normally when somebody wants to explore the depths of something in like interior, like emotions and stuff with a character, they're usually wanting to have it more planned out. I've noticed, as opposed to somebody who's like, I want all the treasure, or I want to do this. So sometimes having that conversation, letting them tell you what they expect and seeing if you can work it in there partially or fully kind of works for that as well. It doesn't happen a lot. I've been pretty fortunate. I have a lot of players who are kind of along for the ride, and they tend to have a good time no matter what happens in a campaign. But I've had a few here and there who want to really explore stuff, like planning stuff out ahead of time. But that's very rare. So I haven't had to worry about it too much.
Yeah, when I start up a campaign, I steal from another. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the game 7th Sea, but I steal a mechanic from that where they have backgrounds, which are just basically minor subplots that everyone has. And if your subplot gets used, you get a bonus. And it's like, yeah, for the lone wolf characters, like I'm by myself, I usually give them a cub because that's the ironic justice of that. It's like, hey, you have the barmaid show up. That he walks into the barmaid and have the barmaid show up with the 2-year-old and he goes, "This is yours," and then leave. I've done that more than once. It's like, but yeah, especially when the kid has the stripe of white hair, just like the lone wolf does, because they always have that. And it's like like my hair was like half white. It's just so is the kid. But if nothing else, if you're having a slow day and you need something to throw at the party, and you don't have a lot of time to do something, you can always pull out a adventure hook from their past. You don't want to do it too bad. You don't want to like my whole purpose in life is to like kill this guy, and that's the only thing my character exists for. That's boring. It's like my only purpose in life is to kill this guy, and also I need to make rent for next week. And the landlord is saying, it's like, hey, I've got a problem. If you can do this, I'll count your rent as paid. So can you do that for me? It's a good way to get cheap and easy plot hooks or adventure hooks, and it draws the characters into your campaign or into the campaign. It invests them, but it has to be small scale to do it right. Because there's the people that want to be the camera hogs, but you don't have to camera hog, like helping your cousin get his wedding off without a hitch. Especially, oh my God, he's like, guys, can you help me? And it's like, I need all this stuff done. And he's like, okay, we'll help. He's like, do we get to kill anybody? Probably not, because I don't know which one of these people are in-laws. So, it's a way to if you're going to do a campaign where they have like a base. This is not something you would do in like a West Marches campaign where you never revisit the same area.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to do, especially one set around a city like Sigil or Waterdeep or Threshold, etc., it's a good way to do it. Okay, so let me see. What's the next question? Anybody else got anything to add?
Fred?
Fred, you're muted, Fred. There.
Yeah, I know. That's because you don't need to listen to my computer humming. I think one of the things that I found interesting with sort of using subplots, which is essentially mean there's a lot of different ways that a campaign can go, right? You've got your sort of set out campaign that you follow, which is essentially your pre-made campaign, and then you've got your episodic, which is pretty much built only around whatever the characters want to do or their goals are. But there is a mix, and a lot of people just use a mix where where it's possible they sprinkle in the individual character subplots if it's possible within the overall campaign focus, and that can work really well. One of the things that I found interesting is like one of the best examples of the worst time that this sort of thing can go really badly is Star Trek, like early Star Trek. We're talking about James Kirk, the James Kirk scenario, right? Where James Kirk thinks that William Shatner thinks that he's being part of the group and everybody had their space, but really it was really all about him and everybody else was just a lackey. And this is one of the things you absolutely want to avoid when running any kind of campaign, correct? What I thought was really interesting is I had assumed when I ran an episodic campaign that all players would like an episodic campaign because everybody would get a chance to play through sort of their character focus. But not all players actually like that sort of thing. Some of them prefer sort of like a mainstay ultimate goal that they are focusing on rather than just their own thing. Because once you play out their own thing, it's kind of spent. So you may find that a combination of the two works better, because if you just go sort of TV serial, everybody every week, everybody gets their own little adventure, or a couple of weeks in a row it's this person, or this month it's that person, you may find that they don't feel like they have any real direction. And this is one of the comments that I got from players. It's like they feel like it's cool that we get to do all these things. Each character's got their own little story going on here, but we feel that ultimately in the end we're directionless. So you may find like a combination of like a strong ultimate goal, while you are able to, if possible, if you string it out and you don't pack it too tightly, doing these other things if they're possible along the way, it may actually work much better for you. That's what I've found anyway.
a few years back, I played in a campaign called The Provokers by Matt Click over on his channel. And his stuff, he did a great job with us incorporating our individual characters' things. Kind of episodic, like what you were talking about, Fred. However, not every single episode was tied to a single character. So it was more peppered in there. So you might have 4 or 5 sessions where it's about the main story arc. And then you'll have an episode where you just happen to be in this place, which is near this player's background or where they're from or whatever. And so then you have an episode that kind of tailors a lot around one character. But then you have 3 or 4 sessions again that are now about the main arc. And that I found was really awesome. Now, with that one, that was kind of where we would have a lot of side conversations off stream about, hey, you know, not this next session, but the session after that, I want to explore Brasswick's, you know, how he became a cleric or whatever. And so maybe we'll do a flashback in this. And I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, that'd be kind of cool, or this. And we'd bounce a couple ideas. And then I still didn't really know what was going to happen, but I knew little bits. And it actually made for some pretty fun stuff. One, I could plan a little bit of the role play, but it still had enough that surprised me. And then the other party members got to learn more about my character, but it wasn't dominating the campaign. It was just like 1 or 2 sessions here, and you know, that was kind of nice. And so I think if you can do that well, I think you got something. Again, it does require, like you said, trust with your party and all the players, and buy-in from everybody. And not everybody likes that style of play, you know, and that's the other thing. So if you can find a group that's into that style of play, awesome, you know. So it just depends. But I will say, in the Provokers, I think it went really well for us.
Yeah, that balance, like you're saying, because I've always found, and again, I played in the days when I just gave you your background. You know, people, they just said, oh, I'd say you are this or that. But I also didn't run it that severely. But when you have people doing that, any way you can personalize it and make things a little personal is good. And I think Glenn's point about little things, your cousin shows up and he's in town and he's a troublemaker and you're like, oh, what's he going to do now? But he doesn't. He's like, hey, just glad to be here. And you think the character knows something's going to happen. Yeah, this guy, he's always is a con artist. He's this, but he's my cousin, or, you know, and my mom told me to watch out for the. Those are the kind of little things that, and they don't have to tie into the big plot.
Right.
They give that little flavor of it being a real world. And like you said, then we're still going for our big goal or whatever it is, or whatever's happening that we're like, oh my God, what about this or what about that? But those little touches can be nice because you are in a world, right? You do exist in this world.
Yeah, from personal experience, it's not something you want to do every adventure, but every 3 or 4, it's a nice mix from just go into this dungeon, kill everything, and get the treasure.
Yep.
Especially if you have a player that's not as engaged as the rest.
Yeah.
Like pulling them in with that, just that little thing. Like, oh, your mom's in town, but why is she in town?
Right.
You know?
Everybody quick clean.
Yeah.
I've
Or
got
your
4
brother.
brother-in-laws in real life, so I always use that option.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a tool. It's not a campaign.
Right.
Okay, well, we have the 4th one, and everybody's gone first, so let's roll. Okay, 1, 2. All right, Kevin. All right, the next topic is another pillar that I always use in my games for D&D, but they don't seem to talk about. How much impact do you allow your characters to have in a setting? Do you let them, you know, like in the original Beckme setting, right around 9th level, they started knighting you and giving you domains. Well, in other settings, you know, just get back in the dungeon. You're never going to be king.
You know, and that's a really good point. You know, I think, as I remember, and I might be wrong, Gygax and Arneson thought once you got to 10th level, you'd get a keep and you'd have your castle, and then you'd like roll up another guy or something. You know, you would just be your whatever. You know, because how interesting was it to play that? I do, because I like the sandbox style. I want my players to influence the campaign. And it's really funny. Fred did this video today about creating a world in which he draws 3 little blobs and says, there's your world, folks. You know, And he did the old, yeah, there it is.
There it is.
And it is that thing about or just what Juice was saying, I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm going to wait to see what they do. For me, there is I want to have a little more worked out because I don't want to get into too much of where they suddenly see the man behind the curtain, the wheels turning, and they go, he's just kind of pulling this stuff out of his ass. He's waiting for us to do stuff. But definitely, I love it when the players are influencing the story. Not, people talk about emergent story, that's kind of a thing, and you can, it's great, but you can also get a little overboard with that, where we're all kind of together creating in this fun thing. I still think you need a GM, you need somebody directing the show, as it were. But I think they should. Why just kill monsters and get more stuff? And by the way, you have players that's what they want to do. Just their stats are their whole thing. I also feel like when they see that really happen, when they're influencing the world, they get into D&D in a different way. That's just, I think, great. So yes, I let them influence it. When they do things that surprise me, I did a video about a month or so ago with these characters. They killed a Medusa. There was this weird statue. They happened to find a stone to flesh spell, and they said, let's go back and raise that statue. And I had no idea what it was. I just had to make it up on the fly. It was this 8-foot tall, the golden man, they called him. And I made him sort of mysterious and everything. And he became this bizarre figure. And I went along with it because they were influencing the story. And, to me, that's what's fun too, is like, it's sort of like the improv prompts or something. Not quite that, but you know what I'm saying? Like, make something out of this. Make something out of what these players did. And and it might be something you hadn't even thought of, right? Something that you take things in a different direction and you realize, these people in this town really would do this or would do that. And the players are influencing it. So as long as you're not kind of letting them, it's that balance, like with all this stuff we've been talking about tonight. It's very fascinating. It's all that, the session zero of this is the kind of game we're going to play. These are the players I've got. This is how we're going to play. Because I have seen some campaign settings, especially the OSR thing, where it's this kind of weird, or to me weird, totally emergent. You're just there and you're creating this story, and it feels a little like we're all congratulating each other. I don't know. I don't quite know how to describe it because I haven't played in one. Maybe someone has, and they say, "Oh, it's really great." But so I think you should let them influence, but you still have to take the steering wheel every once in a while.
Okay, Juice, what's your take?
So, to me, this goes a little bit hand in hand with player agency for me. So I like to let my players impact the world as much as they want to. So what I mean by that is I might have a campaign planned. I might have the big story arc, whatever. You might have people in the group that want to start their own store. And yes, it can derail the campaign if you let it, because the campaign isn't about their store necessarily. But I will still let them do that. And I will tie into the main campaign, maybe getting ingredients to sell in their store. Or, maybe a rival competitor is, also adventuring and doing stuff or whatever. Luckily, I haven't had that specific scenario in depth. But again, it's that same kind of thing. Now, with that, though, I also, say the party is in a tavern and a player decides that just randomly they wing it and they almost take DM duty away from me. And they're like, oh, I noticed my brother-in-law is at the same tavern. I will let a player do that and make a tie to a random NPC there. It takes some of the work off my plate. I love the idea of letting players do something that might create a more interesting scene or whatever in the moment, within reason. No, I'm not going to let a player say, oh, I opened this drawer and hey, there's a gun, in this drawer. No, that's not going to happen. But, if they're searching something and I don't have something prepared, I might say, well, what are you hoping to find? And they say, oh, I'm looking for a letter opener. I'm like, well, yeah, you happen to find a letter opener and ink and parchment paper and, envelopes and wax seals and whatever. And, now they've got their letter opener. I have no idea what they're going to use it for, but they have an idea. And so I like to run with that. If they do want to build a keep or a headquarters somewhere, again, I'm cool with that. If they want to take over a dungeon that they've cleared out and make that their base of operations, again, I am totally cool with that. Call it what you want. Maybe it becomes infamous and the surrounding towns know of it as, hey, that's the adventurer's place. If we need something, we can go there and ask for help. Or, so I haven't experienced a ton of that, but I am definitely the DM who lets them shape the world as much as they want to. And I think part of it is because I could always wipe it out with a natural disaster, a Tarrasque, whatever, so it doesn't matter, so whatever they can do, I can do better. So, it's all cool with me. And if they're having fun, I'm having fun. And part of the fun is not knowing what's going to happen too. If I know everything, I might as well write a book. So for me, just going along with the flow sometimes is fun. And I like that aspect of the game. Heck, it's an RPG. There shouldn't necessarily be strict limits all the time, in my opinion.
And I love the idea from what you're saying. Every action has some. So you open up a tavern in town, and the guy down the street is like, "What's this? A competitor, right?"
Yeah.
People are going to know. Or you're taking over this dungeon, and this gang of bandits goes, "Hey, that's a good idea," right? So, just as long as they know that.
Well, and it's like what happens when you wipe out the red dragon in the area. Now all of a sudden you have other predators that can now come back into the area. So now
Power vacuum.
Yeah, exactly. You leave a void that something has to fill, whether it's bandits now taking over because now they don't have to worry about a dragon coming up and killing them from overhead. Or same thing with wiping out a goblin tribe. What's going to replace a goblin tribe? You're going to have now more animals in the forest, maybe some new vermin showing up in their old dungeon place. A lot of cool stuff that can fill that. And it's all shaped by what the players do. I love that. So.
Okay, Fred, you're up.
Well, this question is how much impact do I allow players on the game? I just did a live stream today, and I had frankly avoided doing anything on world building on my channel because I did not think that anybody would be able to cope with what I would show them or say. And because you can build a world in 30 seconds. And I literally I literally got a black marker and a blank piece of paper and I drew this. And I said, okay, see this? You've built your world, you're ready to go. And I watched in a live stream. Is about half the people left. And rightly so, because every other YouTuber is telling them to do the exact opposite, right? Just about everybody else is saying the exact opposite. And if I'm not running a pre-made adventure and I'm doing a homebrew thing and I'm using my own world, I don't have one world, because every time I do another homebrew campaign, I don't do this with another piece of paper. So they're all different, and I never keep them, and I just keep going on and on and on every time. So they're always different. And when it comes to allowing people to do stuff, there are various ways that you can get the players to do a lot of the work for you, and then I don't have to worry about buy-in because they came up with the idea themselves. One of the easiest things is don't give you do a lot of this in session 0, yes. I might show them the piece of paper and say, what do you think the name of the world is? There's going to be players who will say, I have no idea. And then there are other people who will actually come up with some ideas. I've had one world called Voltron a long time ago. You probably know what I'm talking about. But you don't have to pick everything. So whatever ideas the players throw at you, you just take the ones that sort of you like the most, and the one that you really like the most, that's the one you go with. And then, frankly, in any given world, including Earth, right, everybody calls Earth something slightly different. Hence my reference to Earth and dirt, but Gaia and various other things. So there's ways of doing that, and then same. I do that often. I'll do that with continents, because who actually knows what the name of a continent is unless you have actually travelled the entire world and you have a world map. The players' characters probably don't have a world map. They've got a journey. This is the whole point. They're going exploring. They're going to find out all this sort of stuff. So names of locations, I often just put a dot and then I just write in when I've got a location. Somebody will come up with the idea. I'll either pull it out of their backstory, pull it out of the little side chatter they have, pull it out of history or whatever I've been exposed to in movies and literature and so forth, and interpose it as I see fit. The pink terraces, I've got to think for the pink terraces right now. Okay, so that's on my list as well. That's why it's on a piece of paper. But you pick the ones that you like and you ditch the ones you don't. And when it comes to things like races, well, seriously, I always go with like, your characters probably don't know that many. Like you're not worldly, you haven't actually been anywhere. So you probably maybe know, 5 different races or whatever number you want to pick. You just pick up a player's handbook and you just pick 5 out of there and like, I'm ready to go. I can add some more in later, but that's what we're starting with. Like it's super easy. I mean, today they literally came up with some, I don't know if you can see that based on the light. They came up with some different ones that aren't things that you would normally find in Dungeons and Dragons here. And I just ticked the ones that I really liked the most and left the others and sort of moved on from there. And gods and goddesses and deities and again, everybody's been exposed to so much literature. You take those, you shift things around, you reverse the name. Thor becomes Roth. It's easy to do and you can do it really quickly. And so that's kind of how I approach my homebrew worlds. Is I'm not attached to anything. Therefore, I'm not in a position where I have to worry about creating a whole lot of stuff and nobody gives a shit about what I've done because they never had any part of it and weren't really that interested in it. I don't have to worry about the fact that I've created a whole lot of material that I never use. Like, I can't count them. This happened to me when I was running Star Wars Saga. Like, I spent weeks and weeks, did all the research, had this world ready to go, had the adventure ready to go, and they had a bad an altercation with some robots, and they decided we've had enough, we're going to steal a spaceship, Fred, and we're leaving the planet. And they went somewhere else. And I was like, oh God, all right, seriously? And I've got this much in the role-play game for Star Wars Saga on that world. I'm like, it's not really enough to get by. I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. I'm going to have to make up a lot of stuff. But I can't because it's all like canon, because it's Star Wars. What am I supposed to do? So, I mean, I don't want to put myself through that anymore. So I just don't worry about it. The easiest way to get gods done is like you ask your players, what's the god or deity that you worship? Do you worship a god or deity? And then that god's there now. If you don't like it, you don't have to include it and say you have to change it, but you just include it. Like, they did all the work for you. Thank you very much. That was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. They wouldn't even know. They put that in their backstory. They put that on their character sheet, right? You don't have to say anything. Like, I wasn't actually going to put that god in there, but now that you have put it there, I'll put it in now. And I do that with a lot of things. I could go on, but I won't, because I've already spent an hour and a half doing this on live stream before here. Okay, so what I will say is that things like castles and kingdoms, the reason people don't play from, in 5th edition that is, don't play from level 10 to 20 is because they don't really know what to do with it. And the character sheet doesn't help them. And as Mr. Welch has pointed out, you actually got like a castle and men-at-arms, and you got a wizard's tower at a certain level. It's actually built directly into the character sheet. Like, that's what you get. So, level 10, I believe, you're dealing with kingdoms now. Like, you don't hang out at the pub or go to the inn. You got your own place. It's a castle or a mage's tower or a temple or something like that. And that's your home base. That's where you get drunk and sleep.
You're drinking with kings and queens and princes and princesses now.
That's the difference, is you're hanging out with a different crowd now, and you affect the whole kingdom, not just a small little place now. And then later on, when you're sort of, level 15, 16, 17, you're traveling the multiverse. You got your own TARDIS, got a Spelljammer ship, or you've got a flying ship, or you've got something else. You're traveling across, you've got a ring of gates, so you can just go check out my buddies in the plane of fire or something like that. And you're fighting along with the gods. So, and that whole part of the game, the top end, is so player intrinsically focused. you need the players to do a lot of the work as a dungeon master. If you try to do it as a dungeon master and you don't get the players to do a lot of the initiation on it, it's that's why it's so painful. You you need them to do all that hard yakka for those sorts of things. Because who wants to be the only one having to try and track everything to do with your castle or your followers or your spelljammer ship or whatever else? I mean, the players are going to have to do some of that stuff as well.
What you need, Fred, once you hit like level 10 to 15, is you really just need to open your own tavern called the Viper Room. And that is how you can still hang out at a tavern when you're high level. A very exclusive club like that.
Yep,
There
you
you
got
go.
your own business. Yeah.
You might bleed money every day, but it doesn't matter. You got plenty of it at that point.
By that time, yeah. What are you going to do with it?
Right.
Viper's Lounge. You could wind up in court too.
You could, but you end up looking better at the end of it. No, I actually really like some of the stuff you said there. Like when you were talking about world building, but then asking your party or stealing from their backstory the city names. Like I do that stuff all the time. Or deities. So my homebrew world, I do have a pantheon, but I tell my players, if you want to worship Zeus or Buddha or Jesus Christ or whatever, it's all possible in my world. And I have a way to explain it in my world, but that's a whole different thing. But whoever you want it to be, it can be. So you kind of touched on that, like whatever they write on their paper, that's their deity. And I kind of am the same way in my stuff. So I like it.
Yeah, I when I run a campaign, I always make the players heavily involved in it because it's about them.
Yeah.
So when their actions tend to impact game worlds. So if they do something here, they'll find out about it later, or they'll be known. I always have the house rule that wherever they go, they have a 5% chance per level that they will be recognized as their fame increases. And I kind of stole that from Ravenloft, but that was when the Dark Lord started to hear about you. And if it'll, you find out what the players want. It ties into what their ultimate goals are. But later on, it gives you more adventure hooks, and that's one of the big things. Because writing high-level adventures is really tough. That was one of my complaints about the Candlekeep when you got towards the end of the Candlekeep, and you're like, I'm a 15th level character or 16th level character. We're going to do a dungeon crawl. No, you gotta kick the you gotta up the game. It's like if they want to have a dungeon, then you have a lot of you can get them involved in politics. You can get them involved in border skirmishes. If they don't want a castle, that's when they go kick butt for the the immortals over in the abyss or whatever. But you have it so that they can watch what they've done in the past cascade into the future, and it changes. They can the game world is malleable for them because as soon as that campaign's over, we start again and the setting resets. If they want to conquer a kingdom, let them. If they want to marry the king's daughter, well, good luck. But I'll have you know that she's 5 levels higher than you are, so you're going to feel inadequate for most of the time. But yeah, it's a tool like everything else with the DMs, but it gives the players more agency in the campaign, which means they will hopefully like it more.
I have a question. This is something that I've found people complain about all the time, and the argument is the reason that people don't play at high level, various reasons, but this is one of the arguments, is because people don't write adventures for high level. And one of my responses, and I don't know how you feel about this, and that is, I don't think you can write pre-made adventures for high level because the kind of impact that your players are having on your campaign now is so much that giving a pre-made sort of structure is probably not going to be hugely helpful. Maybe the only thing that be usually super useful is if you're dealing with a castle having a map of a castle and sort of the basics around castle warfare or the sorts of threats you might be dealing with. It's going to be, I feel like it needs to be a lot more of a source book rather than an actual adventure, because the impact of the players in that way is so different. It's the same with, like, traveling the multiverse. Like, how do you write an adventure for the multiverse without it really being on tracks? I mean, it's too broad to go sandbox, frankly. I think you're looking more at a source book. So I'm kind of wondering, do you think it's possible to really write adventures for high-level games?
You have, but you have to avoid the railroad. Or you're coming up with a scenario and letting them handle it. Because at high levels, the characters are going to have multiple ways to deal with something. The module, what was that one? Legacy of Blood, where they get handed a freehold. They get handed basically, like, hey, we have this barony, it's broken, fix it. And you're high level, and you're like, okay, well, you can bring in all of your troops and fix it that way by force. You can go sneaking around and magicking, or you can just spend all the money that you've been storing up and just buy all the infrastructure. It's like, these are all, like, you had like 5 or 6 ways to beat that module. It's like, they said here's the plot points, and how you solve the plot points, that's up to the players, because like, early, you only have so many ways you can play. You don't have that. You're not that powerful. You don't have that many options. You don't have that many spells. You don't have that many magic items. At 5th level, you get Fireball. At 15th level, you probably got a wand of fireballs, but you've also got all the gold from the last 15 levels of adventuring. So you can have high level adventures. One problem people have is they just, they think that, you're playing, they just dungeon crawl the entire way. Or it's really hard to do a small scale, high level adventure, because you're the big boys on the block. You're the guys that the gods call when they need somebody moved. And yeah, there is very few high level adventures. There's even fewer that got it right. If you look at BECME, I think there's 14 basic level adventures from level 1 to 3. And there's 5 master levels from levels 28 to 36. And the master levels are not really considered that good, except for the one that was, you were playing the Odyssey, only in D&D. And epic level adventure. Just, you didn't want to be one of the hirelings for the party. So it can be done, but it's a talent that a lot of people that write games don't have.
I always felt there was a certain amount of hypothetical to those, like in the Rules Cyclopedia, 36 levels, that how many people, first of all, the way the experience was, now you could use a milestone thing or something even in those days, but to get to those levels, how many people run, and when you do a one-shot 20th level, and you'll see these on YouTube, it all seems kind of, I don't know, contrived or something, because of all the things we're all talking about. The game kind of doesn't, because of this individual 5-person group setup that we all do all the time, and exactly what Glenn's talking about, that's not what you're doing at those levels. Maybe you'd have 5 super high levels taking on gods or something, but it is just traveling in our ship through the plains and blast. I don't even know, because it's not exactly what we've all played all those times, And if you do hear about people playing 20th level, you think to yourself, did they really earn those? They're there. It took us 9 months of playing time, and you're thinking, really? I mean, I've heard that from people. So I think maybe it's possible, but maybe those were all sort of hypothetical. I don't know how much the Wizards of the Coast play tested 20th level. Maybe they did. Maybe they were worked through and they have a good idea. But I wonder.
No.
So Paizo with 2nd edition Pathfinder, they have quite a few modules that start at 15th level and stuff. And like you're saying, about railroading and stuff. I mean, most adventures put out in the last 20 years, I would say, have a little bit of an element of railroading to them. Like, go here, get this, and then you can solve the thing later in the dungeon. like, or whatever. But there's all kind of that element. But, Paizo has some pretty good ones that are kind of open as really as much as you can be, I feel, with pre-written adventures. Not as much as, say, like Keep on the Borderlands, where you can go back and forth between the keep and the caves of chaos or whatever, but they are pretty open. Like they have one, and I don't know what the level is because I don't remember these things and I haven't played them, but I have read a few of them because they send me some stuff. And they have one that's like about going to an island where you are basically entering a fighting tournament, but while on the island you can fight other factions and take their things, and it's kind of open. Here's the 5 different factions. You might run into this one or that one, and the personalities are different with this one and how they handle conflict, and so it is really wide open. And I don't recall it saying at this level you have to fight this one, or at this level you fight this one. So you might fight the hardest one at first and then a easy one later, and things like that. But again, Paizo does a pretty good job of that. Now, my issue with high level play has nothing to do with modules or any of that. It's everything to do with how the game is designed and how players' turns as you level up take longer to resolve. I lose patience for it. On top of that, especially if you use XP, it takes longer to level up. So you might go from, hey, we leveled up, within 8 sessions. Now it's 20 sessions. So a year and a half later, I finally leveled up. Like it comes to a screeching halt where there's not a lot of progress mechanically. And sometimes, depending on what's happening in the story, there's not a lot of progress with the story. And it just starts to get to a point where it's like, hey guys, do you want to start another campaign and, make some new characters and freshen it up? Or option B, hey, can I kill my character off so I can play something new and interesting? That's kind of where I stand a lot of the time. It's also the reason I use milestone leveling, because I can kind of gauge my group and, oh, hey, we're going to level up now, just to keep that part interesting. And then, because some people like that side of the game. But then also, okay, what can I do in the next session to spice it up a little so that there's intrigue into the story, or this character, or this villain, or what can I teach them about the guys they're trying to learn about? But again, I think it's inherently within the system. That's the problem with high level play. It's not so much adventures or anything like that. I just think it doesn't level well.
For high level play, it should be about the culmination, I'm butchering that word, of everything your players have done up until that point. Mm-hmm. That's when they're wrapping up the loose ends. They're going after the big bads. They're they're settling the scores. The family business is being handled, and it's really hard to capture in a module.
Yeah.
Okay, we've been fighting the Master of Hool for 20 levels, and it's like, now we got to do it. Well, you can't put out a module about, let's go kill the Master of Hool, because what happens if, the bad guy in your campaign was somebody completely different? Mm-hmm. The modules at high level, or you usually make it too narrow of a focus, and it doesn't work well with how people play high level campaigns, where it's all about the characters at that point, where they've bled up until this, and now they're get to use all their cool toys to do some really cool tricks.
Yeah. There's not that personal connection to the new villain in level 16 through 20, because they've been dealing with the mob boss in their city or region, and now they're worrying about the guy who gave the mob boss all his money, but they don't. And that's because the DM decided to tie it to the mob boss. There was nothing in that adventure saying that. Yeah. But they don't really care that they just gave him money. Like, whatever. I don't care.
Yeah.
He didn't kill my mom. Damn it.
Yeah. And that's something I've just seen in high level adventures. They don't. They're best used as frameworks.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the trick. It's like, no matter what, especially with pre-done modules, you got to do your own homework as a DM a little bit to create character buy-in, because what's written in there is not always going to work towards the player character's motivations or the player's motivations sometimes.
Yep. Well, anybody got anything else?
No.
Okay. We've been talking for 2 hours. We have covered all 4 topics. We have covered them thoroughly. We have covered them well. So let's call it, and let's go spend some time with our families. Because my cats are about to start trying to start eating my face if I don't get them some food soon.
Excellent. Thank you guys for watching. This is your first time here, hit subscribe, give us a like, go check out our other links. Everyone's links are in the description below. Go check out How to DM, Mr. Welch, and How to D&D, and then Homebrew D&D, I believe, is the other channel.
D&D Homebrew.
D&D Homebrew. Thank you very much for correcting me. It is in the description below. Go check those out. Yeah, I guess we'll see you next time. Game on.
Recording stopped.
Perfect. That was fun.
Yeah.